We've all been there. We study hard for weeks, we practice and practice, then we try to apply those skills and we just keep making the same mistakes. As a former Columbia University student with 15 plus years of experience in both academic coaching and sales training, I've witnessed this problem again and again. In this video, I'll be helping you to not only overcome this, but also to position yourself in the top 1% of learners. At the root of this issue is a small hidden habit in the way we process information. The best way to illustrate this habit and ultimately how to fix it is through the example of one of my past test prep students. Let's call him Tommy. Tommy was one of my most difficult cases, particularly because he had had 2 previous tutors but was still struggling to improve his score on the science section of his ACT test. Not only that, but even when we worked together with my usual teaching methods, we went lesson after lesson with almost no improvement. Eventually, it was clear he thought there was something wrong with him and that he just couldn't improve. Well, that's when I figured it out. And it was this realization that led to dramatic score increases for Tommy within the following few weeks. You see, when we checked over his answers together, even though he had occasional knowledge gaps, he did seem to actually know and understand the material overall. But there was a small habit he was engaging in unconsciously that was completely sabotaging his performance. And that was in the actual method he used for review. You see, up to that point, I did with Tommy what I had done with all students, namely tell them to review the questions they got wrong before taking the next assessment. And this is definitely what you should do with respect to anything you're learning. If you're building a business and got some bad results or lost money, are you reviewing why those results happened before you go out and take that same action again? If you're learning a new language, are you reviewing that grammar or pronunciation you're having issues with before you try ordering the wrong meal at that restaurant again? If you're working through a math or physics problem set, are you reviewing the questions you got wrong on the previous one? The thing is, you might be. You might have said, yes, I am reviewing regularly, but you're still getting the same results. Well, it all comes down to the way we review. Now, to review something, most of us just think about that appointment that went wrong, or go to that worksheet, glance at it for a few seconds and say, yep, I understand it now. But that's exactly where we're going wrong. And that's pretty much what Tommy was doing too. You see, neurobiologically speaking, just reviewing information itself isn't enough. Our brain performs actions based upon what are called neural networks that have formed over time. The more we perform a certain action a certain way, the more that neural network is strengthened. And the more our performance of that action in that specific way becomes a habit. The more we perform that same action in a different way, however, the more that neural network is slowly but surely interrupted, weakened, and a new neural network is formed. This phenomenon is what is called neuroplasticity, and understanding this concept is the key to ending your frustration. It's the same reason you can't ride a bike right away if I just give you a set of instructions on how to ride a bike, or why you can't swim right away if I just give you a similar set of instructions on how to swim. The truth is, information inputs alone do not result in learning, and they weren't resulting in learning for Tommy either. So how can adjusting the way we review lead to a dramatic breakthrough in our learning and development? The key is to start with information and end with intuition. What do I mean? Well, let's first talk about what I mean by starting with information. Ultimately, we wanted to interrupt this toxic neural network we mentioned that was causing Tommy to repeat the same mistakes. So even though learning purely factual information wasn't going to be the key for him, that's at least where we wanted to start. Generally speaking, we'll want to start by breaking down the skill we want to develop into a step-by-step process. Let's take the example of riding a bike. The first step might be to learn how to grasp the handlebars correctly, then how to position ourselves on the seat correctly, then how to do both of those things at the same time, and then finally practicing balancing ourselves on the seat in that position for a set number of seconds. If it's, let's say, a sales process, it might be clearly defining our customer avatar and top of funnel targeting strategy, figuring out what initial follow-up communication works best for a newly captured lead, steps in the process of nurturing that lead, the best approach for setting the appointment, etc. If it's a math problem or physics problem, it might be identifying what is being asked for in the problem, identifying 2 to 3 top strategies to use for different problem types, such as, for example, example, translating a linguistic statement into algebra, and then using substitution to solve for a variable. In Tommy's case, laying out all the steps in his process also made it possible to expose exactly where he was going wrong. For example, we identified that as he was reading certain question types, he tended to read the entire question all at once, go back to the experiments presented in the passage, and attempt to gather all the information he needed to answer the question all at once. Especially under time pressure, this led to many mistakes. So instead, we identified different, smaller steps he could break the question into so he could find each piece of information being asked for one by one. The point here is to come up with the steps, even if they aren't perfect. Almost robotically practice each one individually, and through that repetitive process of drilling each step, ideally with specific examples or by workshopping problems with a study group, we will gradually weaken those old neural connections that keep sabotaging us and start to form new ones. And that's now where ending with intuition comes in. It was this vital part that Tommy, like many of us, was missing, and it was the key that led to his breakthrough, and that can lead to yours too. You see, you might have noticed something important about the steps in the process we created. Yep, that's right, they're practically useless in real life situations. On a real math test, you don't have time to think of steps. In a real sales situation, it's not like you can tell the prospect to hold on a moment while you go check your list of steps. And it would be almost impossible to ride a bike or swim if you had to consciously think of all the steps in the process every single time. So then why do this in the first place? That's where our neural networks come in again. By practicing each step in the process individually and then going back to apply them in real life situations, we are actively challenging ourselves and strengthening new neural networks over time, leading eventually to a point of new habit formation. In Tommy's case, it was a matter of sometimes not even doing a new practice set for homework, but instead going back to the previous practice set and redoing those same questions while verbally recalling each step to himself, and then coming back to the next lesson prepared to teach me those steps, further reinforcing the connections in those new neural networks. How are you going to implement this process of review into the skill you're working on mastering? Let me know in the comments. This is a painful process, takes discipline, and takes a commitment to failing again and again. But eventually it becomes easier and easier to ride that bike, swim in that pool, do that math problem, close that sale. And all because as this new neural network is strengthened, we start to lose those old self-sabotaging habits and start to operate simply on pattern recognition. Eventually, as Tommy reviewed in this way, his mind became trained to spot patterns repeated again and again in question formats, experiments, data tables, charts, etc. And he no longer needed the explicit steps. This same process is why, for example, you see a lot of talented athletes or musicians or chess players perform incredible tasks almost effortlessly. You ask them how they did it, and they tell you something like, I felt it was the right play, or I put my passion into the music, or I went with my gut on that move. They've developed what's called unconscious competence, which is one of our ultimate learning goals. How would you feel if you could finally look at those math or physics problems and immediately identify the right approach? How would you feel if you could operate a business, market, and sell to prospects like breathing air? And how would you feel if you could code or speak that second language or make that speech, not with the overwhelming stress you feel right now, but instead with total comfort and ease? What if you could actually have fun learning? Well, I'm here to tell you it's not only possible for you, but it's almost inevitable if you implement the concepts we've covered in this video. If you want to keep leveling up your learning skill and development, then be sure to watch this next video.